There's a moment that happens when we're alone. Maybe it's late at night, when the world grows quiet and still. Or perhaps it's in the shower, or during a long drive when our thoughts finally have space to breathe. In these moments, we often feel what we've been running from all day, the weight of our unprocessed emotions, the heaviness of our hidden wounds. We've become masters at hiding these wounds, haven't we? We bury them beneath busy schedules, beneath achievements, beneath the perfect images we craft for social media. We smile when we're breaking inside. We say I'm fine when we're anything but fine. We've learned to wear our armor so well that sometimes we forget it's even there. But that armor, that emotional protection we've built around ourselves, it comes at a cost. And today, I want to talk about that cost. About what happens when we become too good at hiding our wounds, even from ourselves. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is to keep up appearances? How draining it is to constantly manage how others perceive you? There's a reason for that fatigue. Our bodies and minds weren't designed to carry the weight of pretending indefinitely. Think about the last time you felt truly safe enough to be vulnerable with someone. Remember that sense of relief? That feeling of finally being able to exhale? That your system telling you something important? It's telling you that authenticity is your natural state? The armor we wear is necessary sometimes, but it was never meant to become our skin. I once worked with someone, let us call her Maya, who had perfected the art of emotional armor. From the outside, her life looked flawless. Successful career, beautiful home, active social life. But in our sessions together, a different truth emerged. Maya had learned early in childhood that showing emotion was dangerous. When she cried as a little girl, her father would tell her to toughen up. When she showed anger, she was punished. When she expressed joy too loudly, she was told to calm down. So Maya adapted. She learned to modulate her emotions, to present only what was acceptable. By adulthood, this adaptation had become so automatic that she barely recognized it as a choice anymore. It was simply who she was. Controlled, composed, careful, but her body was keeping score. Chronic headaches, digestive issues, insomnia. Her system was carrying the burden of all the emotions. She wouldn't allow herself to feel. The armor that once protected her was now slowly crushing her. Maybe you recognize something of yourself in Maya's story. Maybe you too have become so accustomed to your emotional armor that you unimagine taking it off. But here's what I want you to understand. That armor served a purpose once. It protected you when you needed protection. It helped you survive circumstances that might otherwise have overwhelmed you. Your emotional armor wasn't a mistake. It was adaptive. It was intelligent. It was your mind and body working together to keep you safe in situations where safety was unguaranteed. The problem isn't that you developed this armor. The problem is that many of us never learned when and how to take it off. We carry our childhood adaptations into adult situations where they're no longer necessary. We continue to hide our true feelings in relationships where vulnerability would actually bring us closer. We maintain rigid control in circumstances that are calling for us to surrender and flow. And this is where the real work of healing begins. Not in condemning ourselves for the ways we've learned to protect ourselves, but in gently recognizing when those protections have outlived their usefulness. So how do we begin to remove armor that has become so familiar we mistake it for our own skin? It starts with awareness. Simply noticing the ways you automatically shield yourself from emotional exposure. Do you deflect compliments? Do you use humor to avoid serious conversations? Do you change the subject when things get too personal? Do you overfunction and take care of everyone else so no one notices your needs? These patterns aren't flaws in your character. They're strategies you've developed, often unconsciously, to manage emotional risk. The first step in change is simply observing these patterns without judgment. The second step is curiosity. Once you notice your armor, get curious about it. When did you first learn to protect yourself this way? What were the circumstances that made this adaptation necessary? What were you trying to avoid feeling? What were you afraid might happen if you didn't protect yourself? This curiosity isn't about assigning blame. Not to others, and certainly not to yourself. It's about understanding. Because when we understand the origins of our protective patterns, they begin to loosen their grip on us. The third step is one of the most challenging. Small, intentional experiments with vulnerability. I emphasize small because we're not talking about tearing down all your walls at once. That would be overwhelming and potentially re-traumatizing. Instead, we're talking about tiny acts of authentic expression. Maybe it's telling someone close to you about something you're struggling with. Maybe it's allowing yourself to feel an emotion you usually suppress, even if just for a few minutes in private. Maybe it's asking for help with something when you'd normally insist on handling it alone. These experiments will feel uncomfortable. That discomfort doesn't mean you redoing something wrong. It means you re-stretching into new emotional territory. The key is to start small, with people who have earned your trust, in situations where the stakes aren't too high. What often surprises people is discovering that vulnerability, practiced thoughtfully, rarely leads to the catastrophic outcomes they fear. In fact, it usually leads to deeper connections, greater self-acceptance, and yes, the beginning of true healing. But here's something essential to understand about this journey. Healing doesn't mean you'll never feel pain again. Healing doesn't mean permanent happiness or constant peace. Healing means developing a different relationship with your emotions. All of them. It means learning to see your feelings not as enemies to be suppressed or avoided, but as messengers carrying important information about your needs, your boundaries, and your deepest values. Think about physical pain for a moment. When you touch something hot, the pain you feel is unto your enemy. It's crucial information that protects you from serious injury. Emotional pain works similarly. It tells us what matters to us, where our boundaries have been crossed, where we need to pay attention. When we chronically suppress this emotional information system, we lose access to our internal compass. We make decisions that aren't aligned with our true selves. We stay in situations that drain us, and miss opportunities that would fulfill us. I remember working with another client. Let us call him James, who had spent decades suppressing his emotional responses to a demanding, critical father. James had learned to numb himself to the pain of never feeling good enough. But in numbing that pain, he also numbed his ability to feel joy, to feel desire, to know what he actually wanted from his life. Our work together involved slowly, carefully helping James reconnect with his emotional experience. And yes, that meant he had to feel some of the pain he'd been avoiding. But as he developed the capacity to feel his emotions without being overwhelmed by them, something remarkable happened. James began to discover himself, his authentic preferences, his true values, his genuine voice. He described it as coming alive after being half asleep for 40 years. The armor he had worn so faithfully had protected him from pain. Yes, but it had also blocked his access to meaning, purpose, and genuine connection. This is the paradox at the heart of emotional healing. Sometimes we have to be willing to feel worse before we can feel better. We have to turn toward our wounds rather than away from them. We have to examine the armor we've constructed and ask ourselves what price we're repaying to maintain it. But we don't have to do this work all at once, and we don't have to do it alone. Healing happens in small moments of courage, in quiet acts of self-compassion, in the gentle decision to treat ourselves with the same kindness we would offer to someone we love. And this brings me to what might be the most important aspect of healing from emotional wounds: the quality of presence we bring to ourselves in difficult moments. When you notice yourself shutting down, armoring up, retreating into old protective patterns, can you pause? Can you take a breath? Can you speak to yourself with gentleness rather than criticism? You acknowledge that whatever you're redoing, even if it's a protective behavior you're retrying to change, it's coming from a part of you that's trying to help. This inner relationship, how you speak to yourself, how you hold your own pain, becomes the foundation for all other healing. Because the truth is, many of us became our own harshest critics long ago. We internalized voices of judgment that told us we were too much or not enough, that our feelings were invalid, that our needs were inconvenient. Healing requires challenging those internalized voices. It requires standing up for ourselves from the inside. So tonight, I invite you to consider your own emotional armor, not with judgment, not with frustration at how it limits you, but with genuine appreciation for how it has protected you. This armor, however uncomfortable it may have become, represented your mind's ingenious solution to circumstances that were once beyond your control. And then, when you're ready, I invite you to consider the possibility of loosening that armor just a little. not removing it entirely. That would be neither realistic nor wise, but simply creating a bit more room to breathe, a bit more space to feel, a bit more freedom to be seen. Remember that healing isn't linear. It doesn't follow a predictable timeline. There will be days when you feel wide open, connected to yourself and others in beautiful ways. And there will be days when the armor feels necessary again, when old protective patterns reassert themselves. This isn't failure. This is being human. This is the rhythm of growth, expansion and contraction, opening and closing. It's moving forward and sometimes circling back to integrate what we've learned. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is presence. The goal is developing the capacity to be with whatever arises in your experience, with a little more compassion, a little more curiosity, a little less fear. Because beneath the armor, beneath the wounds, beneath the protective patterns you've developed over the years, there you are, the authentic you. The you that doesn't need to perform or prove or perfect. The you that is, quite simply, enough, just as you are. And that authentic self hasn't gone anywhere. It's been waiting patiently for you to create the conditions where it feels safe to emerge. It's been waiting for you to remember that you are more than your wounds, more than your armor, more than your carefully constructed adaptations. You are the awareness that holds all of these experiences. You are the witness to your own unfolding story. And that story isn't over yet. It's still being written, one moment of courage at a time. So tonight, as you move through the rest of your day, I invite you to notice the moments when you feel yourself contracting into old protective patterns. Not to change them, not to judge them, but simply to witness them with kindness. This witnessing itself is the beginning of transformation. Because when we can see our patterns clearly, with compassion rather than criticism, we create the space for new possibilities to emerge. We begin to have choices where once we only had automatic reactions. And that, my friend, is where freedom begins. Not in never having been wounded, not in perfect healing, but in the growing capacity to meet yourself exactly where you are. With the gentle understanding that this too is part of being human. Your wounds don't define you. Your armor doesn't confine you. They are simply parts of your story. Important parts, yes, but not the whole story. Not by far. Remember that tonight, as you rest. Remember that tomorrow, as you rise. Your healing journey isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who you've always been, beneath the layers of protection you no longer need. And that authentic self, the one waiting beneath the armor, that self is worth every moment of courage this journey requires.